but we have a live audience. So please join me in welcoming our guest today, Jake Tapper.
Thank you.
We are so honored. I am Evelyn Farkas. I'm the Executive Director of the McCain Institute. At the McCain Institute, for those of you who aren't familiar with our work, we are driven, motivated by the legacy of the late Senator John McCain and his family to defend democracy, human rights, and to create character-driven leaders. There is a lot in this book about democracy, human rights, and character-driven leaders. But let me just say a few words about our speaker. We are very excited to have CNN's chief DC anchor and chief Washington correspondent Jake Tapper. He has been with CNN since 2013. Prior to that, he spent almost a decade with ABC News, working in places in the Middle East, places that are hotspots again today, among many other places. So thank you so much for making time to be with us, Jake. Jake, I was lucky enough to snag him because I was waiting to go on an interview with you. And I said, why don't you come and be interviewed by me? And he agreed readily. And so thank you again for doing this.
It's less work to answer the questions, honestly.
Yeah.
You don't have to prepare.
Yeah. The other thing is that this is our first fiction book.
Yeah.
But as I said already, there's a lot in this book, and I really commend it to all of you. It's a highly engrossing book, and I have the fractures to prove it.
Yeah. What happened here? What is?
I was walking and reading. It's a bad habit, so kids, don't do it. But I have decades of experience walking and reading, and I have sort of a sense of the road ahead of me. But what happened was I got engrossed in your book.
Really?
Really. And I didn't notice the curb, and I went flying forward. I landed on my right knee, my left hand, and fractured my pinky in 2 places. So that's a proof you should buy this book, and we have them at the back for you.
That's the first injury that the book has caused, to my knowledge. To my knowledge.
It doesn't come with insurance.
I don't know. Don't worry, I'm not suing. I'm not a litigious person. Thank you. The book, The Demons Are All Here, as I said, it's very engrossing. It's incredibly well written. There were lines in there like dimples as deep as, wait, hold on, where is it? With dimples, you could lose your person. And I think you were referring to Bob Woodward.
Yeah. In his 20s.
In his 20s, yeah. So I love that line.
Yeah.
But before we start talking about the book, I do want to take a moment, because we are the McCain Institute, to talk about your relationship with John McCain.
Sure.
So you covered him on the campaign trail. You got to know him. You actually had, I think you were one of the last people to interview him when he was, after he was diagnosed with glioblastoma, which of course many of you know is basically a fatal brain cancer. And he passed away, unfortunately, in 2018. But we do know that you had a long friendship with him. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what that friendship meant to you, what he stood for, and if you have a story to tell us, your best McCain story.
First of all, thank you so much for letting me speak to you, and thank you for understanding. I had to reschedule because I went to Israel to cover the war for a couple weeks, and so I had to reschedule it. So thanks for bearing with me on that. I wore my Barry Goldwater cufflinks in honor of my appearance here, and I'm still in touch with many members of the McCain family, including Cindy, who, as you know, is the executive director of the World Food Program for the United Nations, doing the Lord's work, trying to help feed hungry refugees in Gaza right now, as well as all over the world, and Jack McCain, and sometimes with Meghan McCain. So yeah, I covered the late Senator John McCain starting in 1999, so in the previous century, and up through his death. I was going to go and fly out to see him towards the end there, but the trip got canceled because he wasn't doing so hot. I had bought a copy of For Whom the Bell Tolls, his favorite book. I bought an original first edition, and I was going to ask him to sign it, but never got a chance. So I still have that copy of that first original. that original. He was, he was obviously a flawed politician, as they all are, but he was a very interesting guy. One of the things that was so interesting about him was he, unlike a lot of politicians, he was always trying to improve himself. That was one of the things I found fascinating about him. He didn't always achieve that, but he was always reading. That was one of the things that was really interesting about him. I remember I went with him, and there were about 5 or 6 reporters that went with him for the 20th or the 25th anniversary of the fall of Saigon in the year 2000, after he had dropped out of the presidential race. And he was literally reading a book on the plane. He was reading a book about the Byzantine Empire.
Wow.
Like, Byzantine is an adjective we all use to mean like incredibly intricate and difficult to understand. And he was reading a book about the Byzantine Empire. And his ability to hold grudges was legendary, but also his ability to forgive was also legendary, as evidenced by his ability to go to Vietnam for the 25th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. I'm just trying to think about some of the story that I mean, there's so many stories about him that there were a few of us that he took a shine to while covering the 2000 campaign. I was one of them, and John Dickerson, who's now with CBS, was another, and he would let us into the hotel room when he was watching the returns. So whether the returns were good or bad.
Yeah.
I should give credit to
pretty
John.
daring.
I should give credit to John, because he was the first one that got into the room, and then we all tried to copy him. But I do remember on Super Tuesday when the results were bad for him, and he knew they were going to be bad, and he let us into the room anyway. And George W. Bush was just cleaning up, as was Al Gore, and Al Gore was giving some speech. And Al Gore, for those who may not remember or may not have been alive at that point, was giving his speech in rather stilted language. And John McCain just made some joke about, like, Earth to the mothership, mission completed, which was, funny, because he was, this was like one of the worst nights of his life, and he was just trying to be funny about it. But the moment that I really think about was in 2000, he had this bucket of bolts that was his campaign plane, just the worst. And we would fly on his campaign plane, and it just always felt like we were going to crash and die, and it was just not a good plane. And he was always just nonplussed. He just never. And remember about John McCain that he had been in several crashes, as he was a naval aviator. First of all, he was shot down by the Vietnamese, but beyond that, he was rather notoriously not a particularly good flyer, I think, and had been in crashes as a pilot. And I just remember one time we were all just, like in a storm or something, like where we were flying, and I look up and there's Senator McCain just standing in the aisle drinking. He liked vodka, and he would drink not a lot, but he would just have like a little bit of vodka on the rocks. He was just standing there with in a white shirt with his shirt sleeves rolled up, and he would just stand there. And I forget if I asked him or I must have asked him, like, "Are you not nervous?" And he said, like, they can't get me in a plane. They can't. They've tried. They can't get me in a plane. And he was right. That's not how they got him. So he was an entertaining guy. Again, like any politician, made mistakes and all that, but he did care greatly about his country, and he was a gas to cover. And he was, and I think we appreciated it at the time, me and Dickerson and all the other reporters who covered it, but probably not as much as we could have, that we were never going to get to cover a presidential race like that ever again, just with like almost complete access to his id. And also, for me, so this was 1999, 2000, I worked for a website that is different now than it was then, but this is, I work for Salon.com, which was at the time, this is during the .com boom, and it was really truly a news website, and it was called Salon.com because the idea was they just took ideas from all over, like a traditional salon, so conservatives wrote, it definitely leaned left editorially, but conservatives wrote for it, liberals wrote for it, Matt Labash, David Brooks, lots of different voices, and I was their Washington correspondent, and I would file 2 times a day, 3 times a day, and what was interesting was at the time, traditional news outlets like the Washington Post, the New York Times, only would post like once a day. Like in the morning, they would post once a day, and they thought that they didn't understand that they thought digital was a competitor to them, and they didn't want to post more than once a day because they wanted people to buy the newspaper, the actual newspaper. So I would write a story, and I would scoop everybody, not because I was Mr. Scoop, but because they weren't going to update their website until the next morning at 6 a.m. So it was just an unbelievable time for me personally, because these newspapers, and to a large degree, other news organizations just were not updating their sites.
Right.
So it's just a blast for me.
Yeah. Well, I felt that there was a lot of John McCain in your book in the sense that you were delving into characters, and you were looking at characters who had values, characters who were leaders, some of whom did not have good values or did not have values. And I think everything, I kind of look at your book, and you touch on racism, you touch on mobs, democracy, hoaxes, and then veterans, of course. So let's take a couple of these. This is the 3rd in the series, so for those who haven't read the book yet, it takes place in the 1970s, and I thought to myself, why the 1970s? But of course, because you started the series back, I guess, in the 50s, and then the second one was in the 60s, so this one is logically in the 70s.
Yeah.
Although I understand, because we did our intelligence on you in your previous interviews, that you considered not writing about the 70s. But
I lived through the 70s, and I didn't remember them particularly fun.
Yeah.
But then again, I was a kid, but I was told by somebody, a few people a little bit older, like, oh no, you got them all wrong. They were really wild.
And you found some interesting characters.
Oh, yeah.
Evel Knievel.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Evel Knievel, because if you read about him, he does run for the presidency in your book, not in real life.
But he did actually in real life.
Oh, he did?
In 1972, the Butte, Montana Chamber of Commerce.
A little bit wrong then.
Yeah, because it didn't get a lot of attention, but in 1972, the Butte, Montana Chamber of Commerce ran him for president as a joke, as a publicity stunt. And he wasn't really particularly involved, but you can buy a Evel Knievel for president button on eBay, and it's real. But I just took it and ran with it because I was kind of exploring the idea of celebrities running for president, because we have seen that happen quite a bit, especially with Donald Trump. But also, Evel Knievel, for people who don't remember him, or people who were born after his fame, he was a huge celebrity in the 70s, just huge. He was a stuntman, not a particularly good stuntman, but one that was willing to do stunts that nobody else would do. There was a show called ABC Wide World. With his motorcycle. He was a stuntman on his motorcycle.
He wore like a Elvis kind of one-piece leather, patriotic-looking outfit.
Yeah, he was from Montana. He's this American archetype, that he was born and he was going to be famous, and it wasn't clear how he was going to be famous, but he figured it out, and it was by riding motorcycles and doing stunts with them, stunts that no one else would do. Jumping over the fountain at Caesar's Palace, jumping over 10 double-decker buses in London, and on and on. And he had no problem getting up in the air. Landing was the issue. But he was a huge celebrity. There was a show called ABC Wide World of Sports. Sports was used loosely as a term. And he was featured often on that. He had one of the first real, I think you could call it pay-per-view events in 1974 when he jumped over Snake River Canyon. It wasn't really on a motorcycle. It was kind of like in this Wile E. Coyote rocket ship type device. And it was a huge event in 1974. He was on the cover of Rolling Stone, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Again, not really a sport, but it's okay. And he was this huge character, this American archetype. P.T. Barnum, Muhammad Ali, Donald Trump, just big, lots of braggadocio, and a friend of mine who was a huge Evel Knievel fan said, you really need to check out Evel Knievel. He's this great character, and he'd be great if you're doing a book in the 70s. And just to give you an idea, because you're right that John McCain, there is some McCain in Charlie Martyr, the character who is the main character in the first two books.
So he's a Rockefeller Republican, moderate Republican senator.
Yeah, although I don't know how moderate McCain is off and on throughout his life.
Today he would be moderate.
Right, well he believes in democracy, which I guess is the only qualification to be a moderate Republican these days. You can be super conservative on anything, like Liz Cheney or Mitt Romney, but if you believe in democracy, I guess you're not even a Republican anymore. I don't make the rules. But yeah, Charlie Martyr is a fictitious character in my books. He is a Rockefeller Republican, an Eisenhower Republican. He's a World War II hero from New York, and he is thrust into politics kind of against his will by his father, who's a New York power broker. And the first book is The Hellfire Club, takes place during the Joe McCarthy years. The second book is The Devil May Dance, and that's basically Charlie and his wife, Margaret, who's a zoologist, and they're really kind of equal characters. Charlie's the main character-ish, but Margaret's definitely the smarter of the two. And Charlie and Margaret are basically blackmailed by Attorney General Robert Kennedy to go out to Hollywood and figure out if Frank Sinatra is actually mobbed up or if it's kind of just an act. So that's The Devil May Dance in 1962. And then the third book is Charlie and Margaret's kids, Ike, who's an AWOL Marine, and Lucy, who's an aspiring journalist in Washington, D.C. And so that's the trilogy. As of now, it's a trilogy.
So Ike is the character who's a veteran. He goes to Lebanon. He's sent on a mission. We don't find out later what happened, so I'm not going to be a spoiler person.
This is the reason why Ike the son is AWOL, because he's sent to Lebanon on kind of like a secret mission, and it goes completely haywire. Yeah.
So with his character, you're dealing with father-son issues. You're dealing with a veteran. Then in the things that he experiences, there's some of the Southwest, of course, because he goes out to Idaho or Montana rather, to escape. He meets, I don't want to be a spoiler, but he meets a Native American woman that he's in love with. We also see him interfacing with other veterans who at that time couldn't deal with PTSD, so
right.
were suffering from Agent Orange. You had a whole piece in there about hoaxes for dealing with Agent Orange or dealing with cancer.
Laetrile, which was a real hoax at the time. Laetrile was a fake cancer treatment that was sweeping the country in 1977, made from avocado and apricot pits, and Americans were demanding to be able to use it. And the CDC and the NIH were saying it doesn't do anything, it's not a cancer cure, and Americans were demanding to be able to use it. And members of Congress and governors were demanding, we need to be able to let people use this cancer cure, it's an alternative therapy. And the Carter administration and the NIH and the CDC were like, it doesn't work. And Americans, we need to use it,
So when you were writing that, did you realize that we had just experienced a similar thing with
yes.
ivermectin and
yes.
and
No, it was very much in my mind, absolutely. And so when I picked 1977, I picked it for a number of reasons. But first of all, it was just because so many crazy things happened in 1977, the year just became too insane to not pick. 1977, Elvis dies. The Studio 54 opens, the big disco
all
stuff.
these things are in the book, by the way.
The New York City blackout happens. It's the Summer of Sam, the serial killer.
Son of Sam.
They catch him also, the Summer of Sam. It's the rise of tabloid journalism explodes because of the Summer of
I'm going to
Sam.
ask you about that.
So Rupert Murdoch, who you may have heard of, like that's really where he starts getting his huge power, is 1977. Evel Knievel, what happens to... I don't want to ruin the end of what happens to Evel Knievel, but he has a huge downfall that happens at the end of 1970. That's what?
Very bad.
But it's not that though. But it's not a physical downfall. But like his career takes a real
Dive.
Evel Knievel literally jumps over sharks at the beginning of the book, and also in real life. That's like 6 months before Fonz does it. I'm trying to think. People are seeing aliens all over the country. There is a huge explosion of cults. Like 1977 is just this. Jimmy Carter takes office. Just an insane year.
You're hearing about Agent Orange?
Yeah. Oh, and all this. Yeah, people start hearing about Agent Orange and making complaints about this weird cancer that Vietnamese soldiers who went to Vietnam are experiencing. And people are demanding Laetrile. They are demanding that Laetrile be approved by the CDC for using cancer. By the way, I mean, this is no longer a debate that people are having because it's just been proven to have been so bogus. But the great actor Steve McQueen went to Mexico. It was legal in Mexico, and people would go to Mexico to get their Laetrile treatments. And the great actor Steve McQueen died in Mexico, where he was getting Laetrile treatments for his cancer. Anyway, so I was listening, and just coincidentally, as I was writing about the 70s, I was listening to the Great Slate podcast 1 year. I don't know how many of you, I love Slate podcasts, they're so good. And anyway, that one time they just coincidentally did 1977, which I had already picked. And they did one episode on Laetrile, and I'm like, oh my God, I got to put Laetrile in my book. Based on that, I credit them, don't worry. I have a whole note thing.
I know.
And so I'm like, oh my God, how come, not that I don't, maybe somebody has done this, but I had never seen anybody combine Laetrile and Agent Orange in fiction before, but it just seemed like such a natural thing to do.
Yeah. No, it was super, super interesting. Can you talk, so again, without giving anything away, you mentioned tabloid journalism, and I think it's important to note. So the Evel Knievel character has often been compared to Trump because of certain characteristics, and you're welcome to talk about those. But also you have this
His ability to put butts in the seats, really. Yeah. His ability to get media attention, his ability to get fans, his ability to say whatever he wants and there's no consequences. I mean,
which people wanted to parlay for political purposes.
Yeah.
And he did. He was convinced.
He's, whether you like him or hate him, there's people who love Evel Knievel, there's people who love Trump. I don't mean it in a pejorative way. There is a DNA that they share that plenty of politicians wish they had.
Yeah. So there's also a character called Max Lyons and the Lyons family, and in your book they're British. But it doesn't take a detective to see that they're basically Rupert Murdoch and his family.
True.
And you have some really interesting quotes too, where you talk about tabloid journalists. And I'm going to see, quote, "No one is more opaque than wealthy media families who demand transparency from everyone else."
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about why you chose to put them in this book?
So that was Kara Swisher. Kara Swisher, the great podcaster, I was doing an interview with her for my last book, and she suggested that I have Rupert Murdoch in my next book, and I told her no, that it was a bad idea, but she was right and I was wrong, because Rupert Murdoch is a fantastic character, and as evidenced by Succession, and I just have him earlier in his career, I wanted to, and I did a lot of research about him, specifically in the 1970s, not in his current incarnation, because it is fascinating what he did, which is he saw a chasm in American journalism. He saw an American journalism that was unapproachable for a lot of America. unaccessible, and he exploited it for worse. It could have been for better, but it was for worse. He started in San Antonio. There were actually articles praising Rupert Murdoch in the 70s because again, people here some of them are very young and they don't remember print newspapers at all, much less the fact that there used to be a morning newspaper and then there would be an afternoon newspaper. But in the 70s, they started killing off the afternoon newspaper. But Rupert Murdoch was keeping the afternoon newspaper in San Antonio alive. And people thought that he was the greatest thing in the world because he was keeping the afternoon newspaper alive in San Antonio. Now, the way he was doing it was with a lot of trash, a lot of like, the killer bees are coming from South America and they're going to kill you all and your family. But he was keeping them alive. And by the way, anybody my age or older who spent a lot of their time in the 70s and 80s being terrified by the killer bees that were soon going to come and kill us, you got Rupert Murdoch to thank. I discovered that during the research for this book. I did not know who to blame for that fear. I still don't know who to blame for my fear of quicksand, but that's a Gen X problem. But I don't think it's Murdoch's fault. Probably the people from National Geographic. Anyway, but he came in and he saw that, and look, I didn't want the Murdoch character, Max Lyon, to be a mustache twirling bad guy. I wanted him to be believable. I wanted him to have an argument as to why the Max Lyon character comes into D.C. and he starts a newspaper called the Washington Sentinel, which is not snobby like the Washington Post and not snobby like the Washington Star, in his view. And he wants it to be accessible to the common man in D.C. And there is an argument to be made that the New York Times did not cover the Son of Sam serial killer sufficiently. And if you go back and look at how they covered the Son of Sam killer as like barely a crime story, there's an argument to be made that, maybe they should have covered that a little bit more. There was a serial killer. Okay, he was hitting the outer boroughs, not Manhattan, but still, this was something that people were legitimately scared about. That said, it became pretty clear pretty quickly that Murdoch's philosophy, and I gave I gave 2 or 3 actual Murdoch quotes to Max Lyon in the book, which is...
Footnotes them.
Yeah, I footnote them. Which is that Rupert Murdoch believes that news consumer behavior is driven by 2 things, fear and rage. And once you understand that, you understand New York Post and Fox News programming decisions. It's fear and it's rage. They want to make you scared of people and things, and they want to make you mad at people and things. And that's it. And a lot of the fear and a lot of the rage is based on whether the people are brown or black or coming for your kids in some way, shape, or form. And Lucy, who is the journalist character in the book, gets swept up by the charming Lyon family, who are running this newspaper, and she becomes the star reporter covering a serial killer. She doesn't like what they're doing to her copy because they're juicing it up to sell papers. And then the Lyons start injecting some racial additions to her copy, and she starts really not liking what they're doing. So that's part of the plot.
Yeah, and without giving away the plot, later when she's talking to her mother, she thinks that her mother is obliquely criticizing her because the mother is talking about how Elvis died, and he died right after a tell-all book had been published about his drug consumption and his lifestyle.
A real book.
And the mother is speculating out loud that perhaps this book led Elvis to have his heart attack. That basically she's blaming the journalist who wrote the book. Steve
Dunleavy from the Fox Empire wrote this book with the cooperation of 2 of Elvis's former bodyguards who did a tell-all about Elvis. And look, and in the defense of Rupert Murdoch, there's no allegations that anything they wrote was not true. But there is a theory out there that Elvis in his last days was so upset about this book that put him on a death spiral and he died. Again, I'm not saying that there was anything in the book that was not accurate, but it does start. It does prompt the question in Lucy's head about when journalists actually become part of the story because by what they report, they actually become actors in the drama.
So they spur other people to action.
Right.
So how do you approach that? I mean, what would you say to a young journalist? How do you avoid becoming part of the story or actually writing the real life story by what you cover or how you cover it?
None of these are easy questions, and they all are part of being a journalist. And I don't know, I did not go to journalism school, so I don't know what they teach in journalism school, but they are all part of being a journalist, these questions. And they're not easy, and like a lot of the stuff that the Lions do in the book are not just black and white, easy, like the Murdochs are bad, but everyone else is good kind of stories.
Right.
Like, I mean, yes, obviously, I have a point of view of the times that the Lions crossed the line, and obviously I have a point of view.
And you will too.
And you will too, and obviously I have a point of view about the Murdochs
Yeah.
and Fox and all that. But a lot of the stuff in the book are just questions about journalism. Mm-hmm. Like, journalists do things, and editors and publishers do things, and executive producers do things to sell papers, to make people watch TV shows, to have you click on a story. That's just trying to get readers and viewers. Mm-hmm. That has always been the case. This is an extreme example. The tabloidization of news is not only about Fox and the New York Post, and we would be naive to and dishonest to say that they're the only ones that do it. I mean, so I think there are larger issues, and also like racial issues are not just an issue for Fox and the New York Post. All of us in news consumption and in all of journalism have to deal with all these issues.
Mm-hmm. You also touch upon the idea of rebellion. So in the 70s, which fast forward to today, you have elements of American society who were disaffected, right? We've talked about the veterans who were disaffected because they feel that they served, they came home, and unlike today, where because of Vietnam in large part, when the veterans came back from Vietnam because it was an unpopular war, the American society basically shunned our veterans. Not all of them, obviously John McCain wasn't shunned, but many were. And many also could not deal with something that had not yet been diagnosed, PTSD. So they were kind of disaffected, not on the fringes, if you will, of like conventional society. There were also what we have today too, the kind of end-of-lifers, end of times type folks,
right?
And a whole cast of characters that you had following Evel Knievel, but you also juxtapose them. And again, I don't want to give away too much, but there's a mob.
Yeah.
There's a mob scene. It very much evoked, because on the other side of the mob were politicians. Right. It very much, Republicans, very much evoked
January 6th,
for
sure.
me, January 6th. Can you talk a little bit about that? And ultimately, what did you want the reader to come away with, especially from that component of the book?
So there is a January 6th.
I told you he has everything in there.
So January 6th is evoked to a degree. It's not exactly the same thing, but it is. And one of the things I wanted to understand is, so Ike is the AWOL Marine, and he's in the mob. He's in the mob. I didn't want it to be the easy way out of just looking at some angry mob. I wanted to write about it from somebody in the mob. The mob is made up of a bunch of different groups. Nobody's upset about a fictitiously stolen election, so it's not like too on the nose or anything like that. But it is a group of people with problems real and problems fake and problems ginned up and problems actual. And I wanted to try to understand why mobs would be formed and why mobs would follow a demagogue and how that might happen. It's not January 6th. It's not the same thing, obviously. But I just, we all think about, I do anyway, January 6th a lot. It's obviously, there's still trials going on and investigations going on. It's still yeah, one of the worst things that has happened to this republic. And so I just wanted to explore it because it's still very much a part of recent history. And so I just kind of wanted to look into it. So one of the things that Evelyn's talking about is I have in the book, in Montana, in the forests of Montana, I have this camp of about 50 Vietnam veterans just living in the wild. And the idea for that actually came from, I wrote a book called The Outpost, which is a nonfiction book about a combat outpost in Afghanistan that was overrun in 2009, and the battle for that outpost. And it's just about the existence of that outpost from 2006 to 2009. Rod Lurie, this great director, made it into a movie that came out in 2020. And it's the single work of journalism I'm proudest of. And one time I was in Delaware with a bunch of the soldiers from the actual outpost, and we were talking to some people, and somebody told me about some Afghanistan and Iraq veterans living in the woods of Delaware. And I was never able to track them down or find them, probably because by design they don't want to be found. But they inspired this group of Vietnam veterans. And so I recently, and we were talking about this earlier, I've been to a bunch of war zones. I've been to Ukraine, and I've been to Iraq. I've been to Afghanistan a couple times. I was in Israel in 2014, and I just got back from Israel recently. And I can't say I understand PTSD the way that somebody who has experienced war, like the people in Gaza right now are experiencing war, or the people who suffered from the Hamas terrorist attack have experienced war, or Iraq veterans, or Vietnam veterans, or Afghanistan veterans. I'm not claiming any expertise like that at all. But I can tell you that journalists who cover war do get PTSD. And I can tell you that it is not fun. It is rough. And so if that's just a taste of what PTSD is like, I can understand why somebody might be so troubled they go and live in the woods.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe I'll just ask you the last question again, sort of repeating the question that the second part of my question before. What do you want? Obviously, you want to entertain, and it's very entertaining, and as I said,
I want people to be so interested in the book that they fall in traffic and break their finger. That's clearly my intent, is to cause physical harm. Oh, as you have. No, I honestly, the main goal of any book I write is I want people to read it all the way through, and I want them to be like, I need to know what happens next. I need to know what happens next, because I know as an author, I am competing with your phone, I am competing with Netflix, I am competing with Twitter, I'm really competing, and I know as an author, I know as a reader, how many books I start that I don't finish. So that is, I know that. Good books that I don't finish. So I know I am grabbing you and I am pulling you in and I am not letting go. That is what I'm trying to do.
Okay. I think you're also trying to make us think.
Yes, that too, but that's number two. That's number two, though.
Yeah. Because there was a lot to really make me think, and I really appreciate it. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, thanks.
We are now going to turn to audience Q&A, and I don't know if we have a microphone going around. We have a microphone going around, so if you get my attention, I will call on you.
I'm Dr. Elaine Soreo. I'm the Associate Rector of a Ukrainian University.
Hi.
Hi. I really appreciated this because I want to get the book. I don't want to fall in the street, but I definitely want to get the book. I need a little diversion that also relates to a time frame I know maybe a little too well. I would like to ask you, moving some of this forward, both in the sort of novel-esque sense that we're seeing today, with so much on the social media and so much not just information, not just misinformation, but disinformation, and particularly the players, I'll call them the bad actors, let's say, of states, and I'll put a fine point on Russia. The disinformation that is generated and generated and generated over and over, and once it's on that merry-go-round, how do you see the U.S. particularly being able to counter the disinformation that is undermining everything right now?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. One of the main problems is we're doing it to ourselves, right? This disinformation. People want to believe the narratives they have signed into on whatever, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, Israel, Gaza, Russia, Ukraine, whatever it is. People want to believe what they want to believe. They don't care. I'm speaking very generally now, but people on social media don't seem to care. They don't seem to check facts. Elon Musk has done a terrible disservice to social media by removing blue checks as a symbol of verified sources and just making it a symbol of who has paid. So some of the worst people in the world have blue checks, and verified sources do not. And I mean, I was just talking about this with Evelyn, like we were watching, last night as the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, went into Al-Shifa Hospital, and we still don't know what happened and whatever. I was watching people, people, journalists, NGOs, whatever, commenting without any facts on the ground, one way or the other. Yeah. And we still don't know. I still don't know facts about what happened. Bad, good. I don't know anything in terms of facts. And we're doing it to ourselves, just commenting, sharing, and I don't know how you if people in authority are not willing to take responsibility. There was this total smear of CNN and other news sources having to do with a freelance reporter and his freelance photographer and what he may or may not have known about October 7th. And I don't even know anything about it, but the allegation was that CNN knew ahead of time about October 7th, which obviously we did not. And there was a United States Senator making allegations about this. People need to take a breath. People in authority need to take a breath and get facts. So we can't even get to a place where the United States government can counter Russian propaganda if United States senators and United States representatives are just going to believe. Congresswoman Tlaib with the allegations about the attack on the hospital that U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence counteracted that. Everybody can have an opinion, but opinions do not need to be shared every 30 seconds on social media, every minute of the day. Do you know what I mean? Especially if you're in a position of power and consequence. People in positions of power need to set an example by shutting up.
I will say, as somebody who worked in the Senate, so worked in government, ran unsuccessfully for Congress, I think the onus is on our Congress. It's on the leadership of the political leadership to set up rules. Why is Elon Musk deciding what is authoritative or not? So I think, and with the dawn of AI, we hosted Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt, talk about their book in New York at a dinner. And you know, it's only going to become more rapid, this disinformation that gets fed into the AI, and very hard to then take out, if you will, take out of the blockchain and out of the bloodstream, the information bloodstream. So I think we need to have regulations in place yesterday on the old technology, again, to say nothing of the new technology.
Yeah, I'm loath to support like government regulation of speech, but I'm just going to say, like, my general feeling is people in power, whether it's governments or NGOs or journalists, business people, like, there just needs to be a lot more willingness to, like, take a breath, be responsible with your voice, don't believe everything you read on the internet, let facts come in, because I see a society tearing itself apart based on narratives that people want to believe, and it takes a long time, especially when we're talking about wars, where we still don't know what's going on in certain parts of the world. We just don't, because it's not safe to be there. And like in Ukraine, there are parts of Ukraine we still have no idea a year later what happened in parts of the world, you know, because it's not safe to go there, or it hasn't been for 6 months. And you know, there are things that happened like in Dulles a day ago that I'm still trying to gather facts about, you know, and like, I'm not going to say anything about it until I know all the facts. And
now I'm curious. Okay, next question. Okay, I'll go to this side, and then I know we have some others there.
Thank you. Hi, Jake. It's nice to see you.
hi.
My name is Janet Majid. I was at the 6th and I event that you did in July. I gave you the bobblehead of Margaret Chase.
That was so sweet. That is in my living room.
Oh.
She gave me a Margaret Chase Smith bobblehead. Margaret Chase Smith, who was one of my heroes, she was a Republican senator from Maine, who was a big character in the Hellfire Club, who gave the Declaration of Conscience against Joe McCarthy, which is very difficult to do. Oh my God, you hit the sweet spot in my heart when you gave me that. Like,
I'm so happy to hear that.
it was so sweet, and it's, yes, Margaret Chase Smith bobblehead. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
are you kidding? It's like chocolate and peanut butter. Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that. I do have a serious question.
Okay.
So, of course, you were in Israel for a couple of weeks, and you've reported on wars and on serious world events before, as you said. But I've heard, I believe you say, and definitely other journalists nowadays say, that there's something different about this iteration of that war, that there's something different about this moment than in the past. And so I was wondering if you could talk to what is different about this time, and also in a moment where there's so many high emotions. I mean, people are throwing accusations left and right. You're either a Hamas or a terrorist supporter, or you're a genocide supporter.
Right.
How do you navigate having that conversation?
Well, I've been called both. So,
Right.
yeah. I can't speak to this being a different moment in time. There have been horrible wars before, and there will be, unfortunately, horrible wars in the future. I think it is, this is going to sound very counterintuitive, okay? I see a possibility, maybe I'm dreaming, but I see a possibility that from this horrible, horrible experience of everything that has happened, that there could be a two-state solution. I see that as a possibility, that this is just so abhorrent, everything that has happened from October 7th on, that there could be Hamas gone, Netanyahu government gone. I see that as a possibility. And one of the reasons I see that as a possibility, you know, it's funny, on social media there's no nuance, none. But I did a show, everything runs together. I did a show last week, and I had two guests, and they both surprised me. I had on the Republican chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and I asked him if Israel was targeting, if its targeting of Hamas was as accurate as he wanted. And I expected him, and this is my bias, okay? I expected him, conservative Republican from Ohio, to say, I'm bad for expecting this, okay? I'm not saying this is good, but I expected him to be Israel, rah, rah, they can do no wrong. And he said, basically, I think they're trying, but they're not meeting up to our standards, okay? I was surprised by a nuanced answer. I think, they're trying, but we want them to do better. They're not meeting up to our standards. I was like, oh, okay. And then I had on a woman, Haneen Okal, who is a woman, a Palestinian-American woman from New Jersey, who we had been interviewing and talking to and keeping tabs on and trying to get out of Gaza since the Tuesday after the October 7th attack. And we had interviewed her once on October 10th, a Skype interview. She had 3 kids. One was 2 months old, one was 2, and one was 8. And literally we're doing the interview, and that October 10th we're hearing bombs. Her kids are terrified. Her husband's in New Jersey. We don't know if this woman's going to make it. We don't know if, this is the worst. One of her kids is breastfeeding. She's in a hijab, Soon we're talking to her as often as we can. We're texting with her. Long story short, whatever. Eventually, she gets out. And anyway, so we get her on from New Jersey. She comes on the screen. She looks like she's from New Jersey. She's got she's not in a hijab anymore. She's I don't mean it pejoratively, even though I'm from Philadelphia. Yeah. Anyway. And I asked her the same question. Like, are the Israelis targeting Hamas? Like, you're there. Like, what is it like? And I expected her, again, bad Jake. I expected her to be like, they're carpet bombing, blah, 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 blah. And her answer was also nuanced. We don't know. They're definitely hitting Hamas, but, I don't know. It was a nuanced answer. I don't want to do disservice. Both of their answers are on transcripts or whatever. But both of them gave nuanced answers. Both of them are actually knowledgeable. One of them was in Gaza. One of them is chairman of the Intelligence Committee. Both of them are actually speaking from the heart and from the brain. And I know Haneen still has relatives in Gaza, and I'm sure she's horrified by what's going on. But I also know that a lot of the people in Gaza hate Hamas, hold them responsible at least as much, if not more, than the IDF.
And a lot of people in Israel do not view Netanyahu with any favor.
No, they hate his guts. And they also think that one of the reasons why October 7th happened is because half the military was in the West Bank protecting the extremist settlers who they do not like, right? The West Bank is a whole other thing. It's hard for people who are not familiar with the conflict to compartmentalize the Gaza and the West Bank situations. But, the other thing is, a lot of the people that were killed on October 7th were peaceniks, were left-wing Israelis who employed Gazans and want a two-state solution and hate Netanyahu and were part of NGOs that looked over, there's not a lot of room for nuance on social media, but in Israel and the Middle East, there actually is a lot of nuance.
I don't, it's not about what I think, but I will say that there is a chance sometimes out of the most horrible things comes something that's positive politically. So
Yeah.
I do think that for the Israeli people, this was a frightening existential thing. For the Palestinian people, it was how much more can we take? It's been bad like this for so long, and
Right.
everyone's let us, abandoned us. So maybe out of this will come really
I don't know.
a better solution.
It's hard to imagine it, and maybe I'm being naive, and maybe it's just because I have PTSD. I'm just trying to get out of the PTSD. I don't know, but all I can tell you is it's so awful. It's just so awful, and it's got to get better because it can't. It can get worse, and we all know it can. But I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but I did talk for 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah. Sir.
Hello, my name is Paul Kervin. I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. I have a comment and a question. the way you describe what you do, you're very much an artist because you want to change the way people see things. And that's what good art does. It makes you see things in a new way. Maybe it has to go to the end of the book, but you see things. But I have a question about you and your work as a journalist and you and your work as a book writer. Are these different vocations or are these different parts of a continuum? And what's the ethics in there?
I think they're different. I do research on nonfiction that informs the fiction, but they're different parts of my brain. They're very, to be completely honest, journalism is tough when I'm like covering war or mass shootings. Like the horrible stuff that we do to each other is difficult. But as a general note, nonfiction is easier than fiction. Because nonfiction, I'm just telling it's there. I don't have to make anything up. I'm just deciding what the lead is, who, what, when, where, why, and how. Like fiction is tough because you have to come up with the motivations. You have to, like, I don't have to come up with a motivation for George Santos. He's right there. It's all there. I mean,
You had to decide to cover it, though.
I don't particularly cover him all that often, believe it or not, much to my staff's chagrin. But yeah, I mean, nonfiction is easier than fiction, and I don't blend them. I don't really blend them. I don't think so. So there's stuff that I learned from the research of the nonfiction and the research in the fiction that I might use in the nonfiction, but I don't really blend them, I don't think, unless there's something you're thinking
Or
of.
vice versa.
Well, and vice versa, sure. There's stuff I cover that I'm like, oh, this is interesting. How do, yeah, I mean, I see stuff and I want to comment on it in a fictional way, sure. But that's not necessarily about the journalism, that's just about, yeah, I mean, the two things in the book, like Murdoch and January 6th, are like two things that I wanted to think about and write about. It's more like tabloid journalism and mobs and demagogues, and I wanted to write about, and they're in there. But because those two topics have been really important for the world in the last couple of years, 5 years.
I know that I'm supposed to be turning it back to the audience, but I want to ask you a question, and I want to do it without giving too much away, but you cover race in there.
Yeah.
And you, what were you trying to achieve in, because you are clearly aware of the reader's implicit bias. Can you
Implicit
talk just
anti-racism bias, you mean?
No, the reader's bias, so the reader reading your story, inferring things about people
Right.
based on their understanding of society and race.
Right.
So again, I'm trying not to give away anything.
Okay.
But what were you trying to get the reader to think about when you touched upon race in the book?
The degree to which media outlets exploit race to the degree to which the Murdoch Empire uses race to otherize people, to scare people.
Okay.
That's what that was about. Even when it's not based in reality. Not that it matters whether it's based in reality or not, but even when it's not.
Right. Okay. Maybe one more question. Okay, I'll just. Sorry, I don't know which to go. Okay.
Hi, my name is Renee Romo. I'm a journalist for Cronkite News on the 4th floor of this building.
Oh, great.
It's great to meet you, and I just wanted to ask you about, we are obviously touched on mis and disinformation, and I took a fake news course a couple of semesters ago, and they were just talking about how mis and disinformation has caused a lot of distrust in traditional journalism. And being, a Gen Zer, I've seen on TikTok, a lot of people are now trusting self-made journalists, people that like to do those TikToks. And from what I have seen, I mean, media literacy is definitely a passion of mine, that a lot of people are choosing to trust these self-made journalists that are not held to the same standards and ethics as, traditional journalists.
A lot of
And
them get a lot of stuff wrong.
Right.
All the time. All the time. I saw, one of my colleagues, there's no accountability for, look, when all people are fallible, and everybody gets things wrong, and when we get things wrong, we own up to it, and we correct it, and I have done that, when I have made mistakes. And it sucks, and it's painful, and but there's literally, well, first of all, outlets like Fox never do that, right? They never do. That's one of the reasons for the $787.5 million settlement for Dominion. But I mean, but all the time, they never do it. So that's another one of the problems with that organization, is because they don't operate like a normal news organization. They don't apologize. They don't correct the record. There is no accountability. But then, there are people on Twitter who do that all the time, attack organizations like CNN or the New York Times or the Washington Post, accuse us of getting something wrong when we haven't, which is not to say that we don't ever. Of course we do. And I see it all the time. They will get something wrong. They will accuse us of getting something wrong when we haven't. And there's zero accountability. They don't care. They really don't. They literally do not care. And it's a shame. And there is, I really wish media literacy were taught in the same way I wish civics were taught in schools. And just as a basic expectation of just like what people should know about reliable sources and information, and what to do if somebody gets something wrong, and like if a local newspaper gets something wrong, what you have a right to demand and what you expect, and all that, and how. I mean, we went through this in remember in 2016 when there was all that misinformation and websites popping up, like the Denver Inquirer claiming that Hillary Clinton had eaten a baby the day before, and all these grandmas were confused because it was just well, I saw it on the internet, it must be true. And we thought that would, oh, well, now we know that, now people know that just because it's on the internet, it's not true. No, it just got more sophisticated. Now it's just moved to TikTok. And now some kid with a nose ring is saying, well, Hillary Clinton ate a baby. And it's the special effects going on, and it's oh, I saw on TikTok Hillary Clinton ate a baby. And it's no, it's just much more sophisticated. And so it's gotten worse.
Well, I'll put in a plug because.
So I have nothing good to tell you.
You're from the Cronkite School. The Cronkite School and the McCain Institute together, we run something called the Disinformation Task Force, funded by Knight Foundation, Microsoft, and with the participation of journalists who are working in that group as experts, but also expert academics and folks from Cronkite. We're putting out a report next year, so stay tuned. We'll let you know about
Great.
it. All of you stay tuned. Jake, thank you so much for making
time
to share
your
book, your experience with us, all of your knowledge, your perspective. Thank you to the audience for joining us live.
This is great,
today.
great audience. Thank you so much.
We have also a huge audience. We're taping this. Waiting to watch this.
I'm mainly proud about them. I'm mainly excited about them.
Exactly. Of course you are.
You know who you are.
Of viewers, yeah. Those of you who are lucky enough to be here in person, there are books for sale in the back that are signed by Jake. I want to also let you know that unfortunately we have to go back to nonfiction. But again, speaking of disinformation, our next Authors and Insights event is on January 9th with one of your colleagues, with Major Garrett and his co-author David Becker,
great guy.
With their latest book, The Big Truth, Upholding Democracy in the Age of the Big Lie.
Nice.
So we're carrying on this tradition. I guess we're doing a mini series on the press, media, disinformation, the truth, democracy. Thank you all for joining me, and please join me in a round of applause for our guests.
Thank you. Thank you.